Hello! Welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about films off the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Best Horror Movies of All Time list. My name is Clay. With me, as always, because there's no more room left in hell, is Amanda. Amanda, how you doing?
That is how I want to be introduced everywhere I go for the rest of my life.
Even when you win awards at work, that's how you want people
Yes.
to enter? Oh, that's fine. Okay, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's no room left in hell. Here she is. That fucking yes, absolutely. Thank you. That in and of itself, that is an award, and I gratefully accept.
I'm just hoping that's, eventually we'll get to that point, and so everybody just lives forever. There's just there's nowhere else to go. I guess heaven also is full, but.
I mean, yeah, I wasn't getting there.
We're not. I know I'm not going to heaven, baby.
Isn't this what this movie's kind of about, though? Is if nobody really died and we all lived forever?
Kind of, yeah, a little bit.
Kind of, a little bit.
That movie in question is 1978's Dawn of the Dead. It is a banger of the highest order. It is number 59 on our list. It has a 92% Rotten Tomatoes score and a 90% audience score. Amanda.
Yes.
Had you seen this movie before?
Yes, to my great surprise.
Go on.
Okay, so when we sat down and started watching this, for the first 30 minutes of this movie, I was deeply confused because I was like, I remember these characters, but I do not remember any of this. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't remember a TV station. I don't remember a raid on an apartment building. Like, none of this. And then about 35 minutes into the movie, they arrive at the mall, and I go, oh, yep. Mm-hmm. I've absolutely seen this movie before.
Yep.
So it was both new and old to me all at once.
Well, that's excellent. That because we'll get into it, but I'm curious how this would play generally to a younger audience today. I know how it played to me as a younger audience because I have seen this before. I've seen this many times. This movie might be like the single strongest. What do they call it in the Spider-Man cartoon? The canon event. Watching this movie for the first time might be one of the strongest canon events in my life because
it was really funny rewatching this after not seeing it and not really being cognizant of it for a very long time. Mm-hmm. There were so many things I went, oh, I understand where Clay got a lot of stuff now.
Yes, I ripped everything off from this movie.
No. I just mean, like, when you guys were doing the Dead Meat shorts.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yep.
For your comic, like, I had sort of been aware that a bunch of them were homages and sort of tributes to other things, but I was ignorant of the source material.
Yes.
And so seeing this, I was like, I understand why so much of that was funny in a way I didn't even realize at the time. Yeah,
we shot a pretty faithful recreation of Flyboy saving Fran from that zombie and then hitting him in the head with a hammer after throwing the world's worst clothesline in the world. But yeah, this is a canon event movie for me because I kind of like this movie is sort of the pivot point of my entire life to a certain extent.
Oh, wow.
After I saw this movie, it's like I wasn't into zombie movies. Like I had been actively avoiding them for a long time, mainly because of two reasons. One, if you've listened to the show, you can probably guess what the first one is, which is Michael Jackson's Thriller, still the scariest zombie movie I've ever seen. And the other one was, like, I was fascinated, but, like, zombies were a little too gross and a little bit too freaky for me. And I had this little, do you remember the Scholastic Book Fair?
Oh, God, yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, one year I got these little books. I still have them. They're like 25, 30-page, like little tiny books of monsters. and there's one that's all about zombies, and the pictures inside are all from zombie movies, and they creeped me out big time.
Oh, wow.
So I always kind of shied away from the zombie movie. And I remember even watching this for the first time, I was a little bit hesitant to do it because I didn't know what I was in for. I had seen Night of the Living Dead, and I had really liked that. And I think at the time I had probably taken the high road on it and been like, well, that one's, classy.
Yeah.
That's a film. I was
Yes.
I was not, a gore hound of the highest order at that point.
Not yet.
And so then myself and probably your husband and a few of our other friends watched this movie, and like my whole perspective on shit just like exploded, because the idea of being in and I'm sure every young person who has watched one of these movies goes through the same process of their mind taking it in, which is being in this situation in a zombie apocalypse, as it were to be called, and finding an empty mall to have all to yourself and having free reign to just like own it and also just like shoot these monsters with impunity was by far the coolest fucking thing I'd ever seen in my life.
It does sound like a teenage boy in the 90s to 2000s, like a bingo card.
Yeah,
of like
kind of
shit you wish you could do, like drive a motorcycle through the mall.
Yep.
Just shoot at shit.
Ride
play
a car
the
through
arcade
the
games for free.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so and this was, I saw this I think probably late high school, and at the time zombies were not cool. Like zombies had been out of vogue for close to 10 years. Like I couldn't even tell you what the last zombie movie was because I wasn't really aware of them at the time. I want to say it was probably 90s, maybe. I think Dead Alive is like 1990 or 91. So and that wasn't even like this, like a big deal. So they 90s was a bad year for horror, bad decade for horror in general. And zombies were basically, they were buried,
I see what you did there.
And so as an aspiring comic book creator, my mind just took this concept and ran with it, and I started coming up with the ideas for what eventually down the line turned into the first comic book I ever did, which was called Dead Meat, which was the genesis of it was I watched Dawn of the Dead with my friends, and then I thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if my friends and I were in that situation? And it just sort of blossomed from there. And then, but at the time I was too young and not talented enough to pull it off, and so I got beaten to the punch basically by every other person on the planet doing a zombie thing. By the time my book came out, it was already a dead genre. But
I will quibble with the not talented enough. I will just say you were too young.
Yeah.
You didn't have the connections and the resources and the experience. I don't think it was a lack of talent.
Experience also counts as talent, I think. But
they're different.
But, when I started doing that book on my own, which I started publishing online, that was what started my career in comic books, because I focused on that. I started publishing it myself and selling it at comic book conventions. And doing that book is what led me to improve my skills enough that I could get into Sean Murphy's apprenticeship program, which then bumped me up another level, and yada, yada, yada. I wrote Batman last year. So it's safe to say if Clay doesn't see Dawn of the Dead, none of that happens. So
that's so crazy that there's such a specific thing that you can very vividly trace back.
Yeah.
Too.
You want to know where the other half of all my stuff comes from, especially if you've read my book Dead Meat.
Yes.
Watch John Carpenter's Vampires. I hadn't watched that movie in a while.
Oh, yeah.
And I put it on like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and in the opening sequence I was like, "Oh, I just straight up stole all this stuff."
I have absolutely had that happen to me in my writing, where like I've gone back and reread something else that I really like that I loved, but I read it back when I was, 16 or something. And then I look at a story I wrote when I was 23 and I'm like, fuck.
Yeah.
Damn it.
My favorite one of those, which I did completely in the know, I knew I was doing it, was I had to write, in high school, we had to write a play, like a 1-act play or something like that.
Oh, God.
And I just did like a loose remake of Highlander where I kind of changed the perspective of it a little bit. And I thought I was being very clever. And then when I got the paperback, my teacher had written, "This is really good. However, I have also seen Highlander."
Oh, my God. Oh, that's fantastic.
But yeah, so safe to say this is a fairly important movie to me. And part of the Dead Meat evolution was about, 12 years ago, trying to figure out how to expand the idea. Myself and your husband and a couple of our friends who were there from the beginning started doing these short films, which I don't think I took the website down. I think they're out on maybe YouTube and Vimeo if you can really dig them up. But
yeah.
But we did about a feature length movie's worth of short films that were a lot of fun. And anyway, point being, this movie clearly made an impression on me and still does to this day, to the point where I have one of my most treasured possessions hangs on my wall just above my desk, which is a signed program from the New York City Horror Film Festival that I got George Romero to sign after the screening of Creepshow that I went to. But anyway.
Yeah.
So, long story short.
Foundational text.
Long story short, I have seen this movie before. We're going to talk about it in a minute after we play the trailer. But before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping, because I don't think anybody listens all the way to the end when we talk about this stuff. So I'm going to put it at the front here.
Front load it.
We're going to our schedule of what movies we're going to be doing is going to be a little bit wonky, mainly because we wanted to cover the new Nosferatu, and we didn't want to mess with our Patreon list, which is at patreon.com/thepensky file, where we're covering reboots and remakes. And so I decided, all right, well, we'll do, after Dawn of the Dead, we'll do the Herzog remake of Nosferatu. And then after that, we'll do Nosferatu 24 as our wild card. However, in between those two, on April 17th, Amanda and I are going to be doing our first live show with some sort of audience. I don't know what kind of sickos are going to show up for this. At the Waltham Public Library, where we are going to be talking about Jaws, the number one film. We saved the number one film on the list for, as it stands now, for our first live show. So we'll be there from 6:30 to 8 o'clock on April 17th. So if you're in the area, please come down and check it out. And we might do a Q&A or something if we get a little extra time. And I'll know you listen to the show if you ask me a question about the movie Cruising. So I hope to see you there, and I hope to answer all your questions about Cruising. So now we're going to play the trailer.
I like that you've set up a code word.
We're going to play the trailer for you, and we'll be back to talk about Dawn of the Dead.
In 1968, George Romero brought us Night of the Living Dead. It became the classic horror film of its time. Now, George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all times. Dawn of the Dead. Night of the Living Dead has ended. Dawn of the Dead is here. Get the room!
It gets up and kills. The people it kills get up and kill.
They must be destroyed on sight.
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Dawn of the Dead.
Okay, Dawn of the Dead from 1978. Written and directed by George A. Romero, starring Ken Faree, David M.G., Scott Reiniger, Galen Ross, Some Romero regulars, such as obviously Tom Savini. John Amplas from Martin is in this in a couple roles, most notably as Martinez, the least convincing brown face makeup I've ever seen on a person.
It's pretty rough.
He also plays a couple zombies in there too. And also, I didn't know this until today. Joe Pilato plays one of the cops in the sequence where the cops show up and take the boat out of there, and it seems like there might be some sort of skirmish. Joe Pilato is the lead army guy antagonist from Day of the Dead. And I guess there's some people have a headcanon theory that it's the same character, which is kind of fun.
The Of the Dead extended universe.
Yes, yeah. And last but not least, introducing the Monroeville Mall as itself. Amanda, what happens in Dawn of the Dead?
During an escalating zombie epidemic, 2 Philadelphia SWAT team members, a traffic reporter, and his TV executive girlfriend seek refuge in a secluded shopping mall.
Yep. And nothing
Can't say
bad,
that's not what happens.
Nothing bad happens.
And nobody hurts.
Nope,
well, Clay.
Nope.
Some things you'll find in Dawn of the Dead include expository TV debate.
Mm-hmm. I really like that TV stuff.
Yeah,
generally, I feel like that stuff can be pretty hacky and just an excuse to get across exposition really quick and cheap. But Romero came from the documentary world, and I love it when he puts that stuff into his movies because it always feels very real. When that TV stuff doesn't feel like a bunch of actors just doing a scene. It feels like a pretty honest conversation and people kind of yelling over each other, and it has a realistic feel to it, which I always like.
Yeah, and I think it fits well because 2 of the main characters work at the TV station.
Yes.
So like it's organic that it's in there. It's not just sort of, let's insert this in and just have it take care of some of the expository information for us.
Yeah, and it's a great device for showing how things are breaking down as well.
Yeah.
Because, as it goes on, it goes from...
Yeah, it gets a little less decorum.
Yeah,
as it goes on.
Yeah, and then it eventually turns into like on The Simpsons when Krusty has to broadcast from the little shack outside in the desert, and he's just got a picture of Dwight Eisenhower and a scorpion as his sidekicks. Anyway, and then eventually it disappears completely, and then everything's gone to shit.
Krusty, you mean?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Racist SWAT team Mario.
Yeah. Man,
come on.
Peter really really making a big swing in the moment, just straight up shooting that guy. Because at that point, they're still in the middle of a police action. And
they're surrounded by other officers.
Yeah, and not to mention, there are zombies. It's not like the zombies don't exist, and this guy is just going on like a hate crime fueled raid or something.
He is kind of just going on a hate crime
he is,
raid.
But taking the moment to just straight up shoot that guy is quite a choice.
Yeah. You'll also find shit kickers.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
We haven't had any of those in a long time.
Nope. The shit kickers were real shit kickers as well. That scene features real shit kickers, real cops, and real National Guard members who just came out to have a good time pretending to hunt zombies for a day.
That's actually amazing. Helicopter blade decapitation.
Yeah, it's so good. So good.
Yeah.
I don't really know what else there is to say about that scene.
Nope. Just got to draw attention to it. A shopping center gun store.
Yes. It's
every mall has one.
Well, actually, no. When we were talking about it last night, I said, "Man, imagine walking into the Burlington Mall and next to Sephora, or in between Sephora and Spencer's Gifts is this massive gun shop." Apparently not the case. That in real life, that gun shop is not in the mall, was not in the mall. It was shot at a different location, but it is very believable.
Oh, that's comforting. It was very believable, but I'm actually comforted to know that there is not a mall out there with a gun emporium just hanging out.
Hell of a store, though, man.
Yeah, jeez. Okay, you will also find child zombie murderer or child zombie murderer.
Yes, I think this might be my new favorite running gag that we do out next to questionable parenting.
Yeah, it's always a good one when we can find it, when we can make it work. Peter Washington, policeman, and OBGYN.
Yeah. One of the things that I do remember about watching this for the first time, one of the things that took me in, I think, was how funny it is and not always intentionally so. And the character of Peter, some of the shit that he says in this movie is just,
oh my God,
bonkers.
Yeah.
He's like compared to Dwayne Jones in Night of the Living Dead. By the way, I would like to apologize right now if this just is me talking at you for an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Given the place this movie holds in your life and in your heart, I will allow it just this once.
Okay. But given that Dwayne Jones in Night of the Living Dead is always talked about as this, like, we've never seen an African-American character played so non-stereotypically before. He's so capable
with
in
such nuance and dignity.
Yeah, and then they get to this one, and Peter is like every stereotype you could possibly fit into a single person, down to the fact that my favorite line in the whole movie, when she said... I was going to ask you which of your favorite lines is actually your favorite line. My favorite line is when Fran asks him if he's leaving anybody behind, then he says some brothers, and then she says real brothers or street brothers. which is funny enough, but then
oh my God,
he follows it up by saying, one of my brothers is in jail and the other one is a pro ball player.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I don't know.
Well, and then later on, he talks about his grandfather who was a voodoo priest.
Yep.
Oh, my God. All right. The multifaceted Peter Washington.
Yes.
You'll also find the Brown Derby Steakery Love Pub.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. I don't know.
And that is love spelled L-U-V.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what that means, but I do know that as they were during the filming, that is where the zombies would go to get shit-faced after filming.
Ha!
Or during filming, I guess. But
I mean, why not if you're the zombie?
Yeah.
Just, stumble around, it's your job. You'll also find Near Death by Hare Krishna.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit too. There was a good chunk of at least my movie pop culture like joke upbringing that involved Hare Krishnas. Like this.
Yes.
Airplane has a great Hare Krishna joke. I feel like there was the late 70s, early 80s. There was a lot of Hare Krishna jokes, and now I feel like do they even exist the way that they used to? I mean, obviously they still exist,
no
but
idea.
they're not as prevalent as, I don't know, say Scientology or something like that at this point.
No idea. You'll also find A Situation You Can Get by the Ass.
The best kind to be in.
The only kind to be in. Tom Savini's Switchblade Mustache Comb.
Always pleasant to see Tom and his switchblade mustache.
Gotta keep that glorious mustache well groomed.
I had headphones on while I was watching this last night, and so I could hear things a lot better than I ever had before. And in that scene, after he pops out the mustache comb, the guy who's next to him, very quickly before they cut, turns to him and goes, "Is that a comb?"
Oh, that's amazing. I did not catch that. You'll also find Zombie Pie Fight.
Gotta have one. Movie has everything else.
Most fun. the most fun you can have with pies and zombies. And last but certainly not least, ladder climbing zombies.
Yeah, I think that's a first.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unusual.
Yeah. One of the things that I did notice this time around is a lot of the background stuff gives you a lot more explanation about how the zombies work than I ever really picked up previously. One of the main ones being the one guy, the eye patch guy, who is one of my favorite characters.
Yes, he's amazing.
When he says that the zombies tend to only eat 5% of the available food on the human body, which leaves enough of it intact that it could feasibly get up and walk once the reanimation happens. And I was like, I don't know if I needed to know that, but that's interesting that they thought that out.
Yeah, I liked that comment actually because it explained why there are so many zombies walking around who aren't like falling apart,
right? Yeah,
and missing limbs and like covered in gore. Like there's some, but there's a lot more that they actually look fairly normal.
Yeah,
and it's kind of nice to have a little like that, like sneak that little line in there that's like, yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know, they got bit, it's under their shirt.
Yeah, but if you have one person who gets jumped by 10 zombies, and each one of them is eating 10. No, it's not 10. 20 zombies, and each one of them is eating 5% of the meat. Then that's when they get torn apart and ripped to shreds.
Right. That's when it becomes a nose to tail situation.
Yes.
Yes. So Clay, we're almost 30 minutes into this episode. Have we arrived at the mall?
Not yet. Are we done? Are we done with Things You'll Find?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
So, Dawn of the Dead, the sequel, as it were, to Night of the Living Dead. George Romero wanted to do a sequel, but he didn't want to do one right away, so he did some other stuff, including what I think is probably one of his best movies, which is Martin, which we've covered on this show previously. And when he started putting out feelers, the thing that tipped him off and kind of gave him an idea was friends of his were the building managers of the Monroeville Mall. And so he got like a backstage walk around of the mall, and he got the idea, this would actually be a really interesting place to hole up during a zombie infestation. I guess making him the first of an untold number of people ranging from the ages of about 15 to, 40, who think the same thing every time they walk into a new space.
Yep.
But yeah, once he started kind of testing the waters, he got a phone call from Dario Argento, who said, would love to work on this with you. And so Argento became a producer, and Romero flew to Italy, where he stayed for like 3 weeks and wrote the script in Italy. And they worked out a deal between them. Argento left him alone completely, which, you could see this very easily being, some Argento putting his thumb on the scale, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
but he left him alone and let him do what he did as the fellow artist that he was. And they worked out a deal where once the movie was made, Argento would have the right to recut it or cut it however he wanted for European distribution. So George got to cut it how he wanted it for America. Dario got to do it for Europe. And so there are 3 versions of this movie, which we'll get into a little bit later, and they have pretty interesting differences. But before we get into that, let's talk about the film at hand. Amanda.
Yes, Clay.
What did you think of Dawn of the Dead? And remember, before you say anything, remember what I said about what this movie means to me.
So shit talking this movie is a fireable offense.
Yes.
This is how I get out of doing this show if I ever want to.
I'm going to say, based on what's going on now, it's a deportable offense, and I don't even care where I send you. So be careful.
I will start with the thing that is going to make you mad at me.
Let's do it.
which is I think it's a little too long.
Oh, well, there is a reason for that because unknowing, I didn't realize it at the time because this, for a little bit more backstage information, this is, the rights to this movie are owned by Richard Rubenstein, who is also the guy who owns the rights to Martin. He was a producer on both films. He and Romero had a company together for a while, but eventually Romero left. This movie is very hard to get your hands on these days, especially in like a hard copy format. Thankfully, in the early 2000s, or like 2004, 2006, I can't remember, there was a fantastic box set that came out on DVD that had all 3 versions of the film on it.
Oh, wow.
And so, but now, if you can find it on streaming, at least in America, it's tough to tell which version you're watching. And the version we watched last night, I thought was the theatrical version, but I realized today is actually the extended version, which is like 10 minutes longer. So it is a little bit long in the tooth, definitely.
Okay. Okay.
I have come to really appreciate that about it, because one of the things that I'm interested in talking about is how my opinion of this, while not getting less, has changed in the 20 years since the first time I saw it. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. Yes, so my main criticism was just that it felt a little long at points.
Yeah.
Especially when there are scenes where they're all kind of just dicking around in the mall.
Yes. Yep.
But otherwise, I was really surprised how much of this still works.
Yep.
Excuse me. Sorry, I'm sick, so I might sound a little gross.
Yes, it's I was surprised. So very different from Night of the Living Dead, which kind of takes its time to set up and does things very deliberately and kind of has like this building sense of dread. This one drops you right into the shit immediately, which I love, and goes from people freaking out at the news station to people freaking out at the apartment complex, and it's like a good 15 minutes before he takes his foot off the gas and gives you a minute to breathe. And I've always loved that. And watching it last night, watching that apartment sequence, I just kept thinking to myself, man, people have been chasing this movie for 50 years and they still haven't really caught up to it. That sequence is so chaotic and it's so anxiety driven, just being thrown into the situation where there's people in gas masks and guns going off and people getting eaten, and you don't know who's like that guy who gets his head blown off in a spectacular fashion. I don't even know if that was a zombie. Like there's a good chance that wasn't a zombie, So, and I'm watching that and basically a lot of these other scenes in this movie, and I just kept thinking to myself, man, there are so many other movies that have tried to do what this is doing and not been able to catch it.
Yeah, and it still feels like fairly modern as much as it is of its time. Like the issues it's dealing with still feel extremely relevant.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Which I was kind of surprised,
Yeah. Yeah. The, I mean, we are in a unique position to have to all have a different outlook on these sort of contagion-based outbreak, how people handle it movies. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me this time was I never even considered the arguments that are had specifically like at the television station as an element of this stuff until going through all the pandemic stuff, because the stuff at the TV stations, the arguments that they're having are very much like acting rationally versus acting with compassion, and like the eye patch guy is like, well, yeah, we need to either start feeding these things or we need to drop a nuclear bomb on the cities.
Yeah, this sort of like cold science versus human compassion
Yeah.
argument
Yeah.
of like they still think that there should be respect towards the dead is
Yeah.
one of the things I think Peter says when they raid the apartment building.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of treated as that's treated like a mistake
Right. Yeah.
in this world.
Yeah.
And then you have this sort of cold, logical talking head figures on the TV saying, abandon your loved ones, abandon your homes, follow these very strict rules, and that's the only way you survive.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, post-COVID, it's kind of like, and seeing the different examples of how people react to this epidemic, where some people are really frightened and they're going to run. Some people are kind of staying and manning their posts. Some people are acting like it's just a fun day off. And that must have seemed, at the time sort of ridiculous to have these, groups that are just going out hunting for fun. I could see watching this movie in the time when it came out saying like, well, no one would really be that cavalier if something this bad was happening. And then, COVID happened and we saw evidence that, humans find ways to rationalize that kind of behavior.
Yeah. 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 The scene that really stood out to me this time that I had never really paid attention to before is the scene when Peter and Roger meet in the basement of the hotel or of the apartment, and then the one-legged priest comes in. The stuff that he has to say is like, I don't know if it's because of his accent or something, but it's almost too on the nose thematically, but it doesn't like hit that way. It's just two good lines that the guy has, and then he's out of the movie, one of which being, you are stronger than us, but I think pretty soon they'll be stronger than you, which is a great foreboding line to set up for the rest of the movie.
Oh, yeah. He's an excellent harbinger.
Yeah. And then the other one being, which I don't think I had ever clocked this line before, which was, when the dead walk, we must stop the killing to win the war. And like that feels like the whole thing right there in that one line.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's worked in there. Like you said, it's easy to not notice it right away.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to sort of skim over that scene. It's just like for effect. Like having a one-legged priest appear randomly in a basement feels a little bit like, oh, this is kind of just like window dressing for how crazy this whole thing is.
Yeah.
But it turns out if you pay a little more attention to it, it kind of does stab right at the heart of the whole thing.
And I think it might not feel so on the nose because, like, I think you're probably going, does that guy have one leg? Like, you're trying to clock what this guy's deal is as he's dropping this
yeah, like, where did he come from?
Right.
He just, like, came out of this creepy, weird door? Like, who is he? What's happening?
Yeah, yeah. But, yeah, we're introduced to Roger and Peter, and then before that at the television station, we've got Fran and Steve, the flyboy.
Oh, Steven.
Helicopter pilot. With a great voice.
As Fran likes to say, Jesus Christ, Steven.
I was saying that a lot watching the movie, yeah.
You could make a drinking game out of how many times either Fran says it or how many times Steven makes you want to say it when you're watching him.
But yeah, it's... I think it's really... I think the front loading of the chaotic nature of what's going on is a really... gets you into the movie enough where, like, by the time they get into the helicopter and things really kind of slow down, like by the time they get to the mall, you need a minute to catch your breath, because they've gone from the chaos of the TV station to the chaos of the apartment to almost getting into a fight, getting gunned down by rogue cops or something, to picking up the gas, which is a little bit not quite intense, but you're still dealing with, like, the helicopter zombie, the zombie from the poster, the two kids, and the the bad clothesline zombie. And so you know, and the characters are getting to know each other and stuff. And I always love the scene where Peter pulls the gun on Steve and says, don't never point a gun at somebody. It doesn't feel great, does it? Like, it's there. Steven is presented as someone who knows what's going on and constantly demonstrates that he doesn't have a clue.
Yeah, I find the relationships between the four main characters really fascinating because, like we're saying, the way they're all introduced, you sort of meet them in these pairs, but you don't it took me a little bit into the movie to realize, because I think I missed a line, or maybe I heard it, but it was kind of like so much else was happening, it didn't fully sink in, that like Roger is Steven's friend.
Yes. Yeah.
And so obviously Steven is the pilot. He's got control of the helicopter. He and Fran are romantically involved. Roger is his friend who he's told, hey, we're getting out of here. Come meet us if you can at this time. And then Roger has just met Peter that night.
Buddy, hard to tell because they are fast friends.
Oh yeah, they're BFFs like immediately.
I don't want to say there's a homoerotic. It's like just shy of homoerotic, their relationship, where it feels like they're like best buds, but it almost feels like they wish they could go a little bit further.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's that. It's very juvenile, and I don't mean that in like an insulting way. I mean it more in the way that, like, when you're young, you can have these really intense, really fast friendships.
Right, yeah.
Like, you go to camp, or you start a new year in a new class, or in an extracurricular, you meet somebody and you're just immediately like, oh my God, this is the coolest person in the world, and I want to do everything with them and be with them all the time. But there's not necessarily like a romantic tinge to it.
Right, yeah.
It's more of just a like, you're so cool and you're so fun, and I want you to think I'm that cool and fun.
How do you think Steve feels about that his buddy Roger doesn't want anything to do with him anymore?
Well, I think Steve does his best as quick as he can to get in on it.
That's true. He does, yeah. Steve wants to be with the cool guys.
Yes, and he thinks Fran is like such a bummer.
Yeah. I bet off screen he refers to her as the old ball and chain constantly. Yeah.
This movie is like the best argument for why three men should not be allowed to be friends. It's like 2 men or 4 men or more. That's it. It can't be 3 of them.
That's fair.
All ends in tears.
Yeah, but I think I like these characters.
Other than Steven.
Even Steven as a character, I do like him a lot as a character because of. I still remember the first time I watched this. We were kind of joking around, being like, "Well, he flies the helicopter, and then once he teaches Fran how to do it, it's like, well, he's dead. I mean, he's got no purpose anymore. The only thing he's good." And they talk about that in the movie, where it's like nobody else knows how to fly the helicopter. So if he's gone, then until somebody else learns how to fly the helicopter, and then he's expendable. But he has this level of wanting to be like a cool, I hesitate to say tough guy, but like I said, he has this like he wants to project the sense that he has some authority, but he really doesn't. And I think that comes through really clearly in the way that he interacts with Fran, because he's got he's got big what's the word I'm looking for? Not abusive husband, but like, someone who when they get married has like a real Sonny Corleone and The Godfather understanding of what being a husband means. Like you immediately get some level of power over your wife that you didn't have previously, And
it's like an insecurity thing.
Definitely, yes.
And
I know, obviously, as the movie goes on, we learn that she's pregnant, and he has some, I'm sure a lot of it is fear for her safety because of that, but it always comes out as very, what's the word I'm looking for? Condescending.
It's condescending, and it's very dismissive.
Yes.
And it's so interesting because him being worried for her safety, like I think all of the men are, given that she's pregnant, is one thing. But even when she brings up, like, good points, it's not until Peter says she's right that Steven will kind of be like, oh, okay, all right. You know, fine, I'll leave a gun with her. Fine, I'll teach her how to fly.
Yeah, yeah.
But, like, he needs that. First, one of the men needs to back it up. And even then, he's very begrudging about it, to the point where, like, she's apologizing to him.
Yeah.
For being like, can I please have a vote in what happens to me?
Right. Well, that's the scene, right? Up to that point, they're really very dismissive of her until she puts her foot down and says, listen, you know, I'm part of this group as well. And Peter's the one who's like, okay, he's on board with it. And I watching the first chunk of this, I jokingly said to you, it's too bad it took 20 years for Romero to have a woman in these movies that isn't the wet blanket, because I was thinking about the lead from the next one, who's very like a proactive, you know, ass-kicking army girl. And because the Barbara from Night of the Living Dead is literally comatose for the entire movie.
Yeah.
And as this one starts, Fran doesn't seem like she's going to be much better than that. She really feels like, you know, even though there's 4 people, she feels like a third wheel. Until that moment where she kind of puts her foot down. And then from that point forward, it's like, oh, no, this is a character who is capable and able to cape and, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say that, like, even before that, I think it's really interesting and really telling that this movie starts with her.
Yeah.
You know, it starts with her, and her attitude towards what's happening is so different than the men, where they're all planning their departure, and she's resisting that, and she clearly feels like she has a responsibility to others, to like stay at the TV station and keep things online and keep the information flowing. And the others are just sort of like, no, we got to get out of here. It's us or them. And she's more oriented at like thinking about a wider community and like a wider society that she still wants to protect and preserve. And they've kind of given up already.
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting, especially given the way the movie ends.
Yeah, and it's funny because once they get to the mall, she really kind of gets pushed to the background in favor of the more action-centric characters. But I have always thought of her as the main character of the movie, for I think exactly the reasons you're talking about, because she's the first face that you see, and you're really kind of watching the events of this film through her point of view.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to have a character like that who is positioned in the language of movies generally as the focal point character, who then kind of gets pushed into a more observational role for a lot of the movie. And that kind of becomes a character trait.
Yeah, and it's interesting that she's sort of both like, she's sidelined by kind of just her general situation of being pregnant. She's sidelined somewhat by the men, but she also kind of takes herself out of it, you know? Excuse me.
So, they get to the mall, which is, it's weird to see. I guess the Monroeville Mall was one of the first indoor, as they say, indoor shopping malls in America. So it's always weird to me, that line when they're flying over it, and I think Peter's like, what is this place? And Roger has to say, it's one of those indoor shopping malls. It's wild to me to consider a time where the shopping mall was something that people didn't understand the concept of it. But for the setup of this idea, it is just such a great location that invites, for lack of a better word, like fantasy into it. Because I think one of the most unique elements of Romero's zombie movies that, again, Romero created this genre. This genre didn't exist before he made Night of the Living Dead. And with that comes the idea of, as you are watching it, you start judging the characters and start formulating your own concept of how you would handle this situation. And I think that can be a pro and a con. Like, it's fun to do, but I hate it when people start saying, like, well, they should have done X, because, like, well, yeah, well, okay, well, then the movie wouldn't have had, that, then you can, that's going a little too far. But something like this, where it's like, in Night of the Living Dead, the whole time you're going like, shit, if I was stuck in a house in this situation, how would I handle this? How would I deal with these people? But in the mall situation, you start thinking like, man, yeah, would I stay? Should I stay? All these things. Where do I go? Should we clean the thing? Like, there's so many options of ways to strategize what to do in this situation. And not only that, like, the more fantastical elements that you would start thinking of, like, you get to see them, because there's that section in the middle where they just start doing everything that you would think a person would do if they had a mall to themselves. And it's really fun.
They're running around playing arcade games and wearing fur coats and
and going through the bank and throwing the money up in the air because money doesn't matter anymore. And Fran is giving amazing haircuts because apparently she can do that.
Yeah. Giving herself and the others makeovers whenever she feels like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too, like, that Fran is kind of resistant to being there and to staying there. Like, she says pretty early on, like, you've all been hypnotized by this place. So she clearly sees it as, like, not a good place to stay.
How do you feel about that? Because I was thinking about that this time, like, because I understand what she's saying, but I don't know what she is, where she wants to go. Because like Flyboy has a good counterpoint where he's like, do you know how many times we would have to stop to get gas if we tried to fly to Canada? And like there's I think everybody has kind of like this idealistic thing they want to go with, but when you start breaking it down, they all have their reasons why they might be good or bad ideas. So how do you feel about her urge to want to leave?
I kind of get it, because I think her thought is more along the lines of, this place is sorry, it's attractive, but it's also a trap.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, if it attracts us, it's going to attract others. We're going to, like, of the false sense of security of feeling like you have this whole place and it's become yours and you own it and it's your domain. And that's not really true. Like, it's not this impenetrable fortress, obviously, given what happens later in the movie. And it really is just, you're seduced by this idea of abundance.
Right.
And it lets you try to insulate yourself and live in denial of what's really happening outside. And I think the thing Fran wants is freedom. To go other places, to move when you need to move, but also to go connect with other people and hopefully salvage something of the world and not just give up on it and shut yourself away from it.
Yeah, it feels like the concept of like a gilded cage, that sort of metaphor.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think she's wrong in that sense, because there is. Yeah. And I think as they, so to go back to what I was saying about how I've kind of looked at this differently this time. The first time I watched this, and for many subsequent times I watched this, I always thought, I love it. It's a great movie, but that middle section is just boring when they're just walking around the mall and they're just whatever. Excuse me. This time around, I was thinking, I really appreciate that middle section because you get to see them get tired of the place, essentially. And it's like they've got so much in front of them that they don't know what to do with it all. But at the same time, you get to see them come to the realization kind of that this is not the answer, even though they've got everything they could possibly want in front of them. It's still just 4 people, or at that point, eventually 3 people. It's just a bigger cage. And like, I always loved that final bit in the sequence where Peter's playing tennis on top of the roof, and then he grabs his bag and just knocks over like 8 cans of balls that just roll everywhere.
Right.
And it's just this,
because he doesn't need to care about it.
Yeah, there's like a level of abundance, but that translates into waste, which then translates into them not being happy because they're still stuck in this place playing tennis on the roof by himself instead of living any kind of life, you know?
Yeah, the image from that montage that sticks with me is Fran and Steve in bed.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
And they're like super, super still, like as though they could be like store mannequins or they could be the zombies themselves. They're just very flat.
Yeah.
And there's no like emotion, there's no affection left. It's all just drained out of them.
Yeah, and it's great because like, I think in a lot of times in these movies they always have like the 2 people who have shacked up and who are lovers and stuff, and this one posits a very realistic possibility, which is like, yeah, they're together, but I don't really know if anything's working.
And how serious were they even to begin with? You know?
Right? Yeah. Yeah, and positioning them that way in that image, like you don't know if that's post-sex or if sex like didn't happen. You know, it's just like they're both too depressed. You know, it's a very good kind of evocative image for where everybody is mentally.
Yeah, and when you couple that with the scene where Peter tries to help them have a nice romantic time, and he makes them a dinner and serves them, and then says, "This is just for you," and leaves.
Yeah. And
Steven tries to propose to her. Mm-hmm. And Fran's like, no.
Yeah, her no is interesting too, because it's not no because she doesn't want it. It's no because it wouldn't, quote unquote, wouldn't be real.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting, it's an interesting response, but it also is kind of similar to the whole idea where it's like, yeah, they're all just play acting inside this place.
Right. Right. This isn't real life. This isn't the way to live a real life.
Right.
This is just a fantasy.
Yeah. I'm surprised. You know, she never answers whether or not she wants to keep that kid.
I mean, I think she answers it by keeping it.
That's true.
Yeah.
When the only other option is Dr. Peter's house of coat hangers or something. I don't know.
I know how to do it. Ooh.
Oh my God. I lost my shit the first time I saw that.
Ugh. So ominous.
So what about you? Where do you come down on, what would you do? Would you stay? Would you leave? What would you want to do?
I think I would be really tempted to stay, but I think I would be like Fran and be like, we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
This is not, there's too few of us. Like if we were an army the size of the Marauders, we could maybe actually guard this place. Mm-hmm. But with just 4 and then 3 people, no way. Like, as appealing as it is, you can't stay there forever. Yeah.
I've always wondered if that's part of, you know, when the Raiders show up at the end. Peter has the position in this movie of basically every decision he makes is the right one, and everybody else just fucks it up. And when the Raiders show up, he says to Steven, he's like, just don't stay hidden. Let them take what they want to take. Don't worry about it. They're not after us. They're after the stuff. And it's Steven who can't abide by these people taking the stuff that is rightfully, the quote unquote, rightfully theirs. And he's the one who starts shooting, which causes everything to collapse because Steven's the worst. And, you know, I wonder if there is the alternate version of this or if that's part of the point where it's, not only is it the fact that they're coveting essentially the remnants of a life that just doesn't exist anymore, so this stuff is more or less just costume jewelry to a certain extent, but that if they had let people in, that they could have some sort of life there, but they're being so selfish about the stuff that they do have that it just, there's no room for anything else but to fight over it. And obviously the raiders aren't exactly the type of people who are going to show up and just, have a cup of tea and leave. But
right.
still,
They're probably still going to trash the place and steal a bunch of stuff and do whatever they want. But it really does seem like they're not as interested in the people. They just want the stuff.
Yeah. And and I think Romero's going out of his way to show that the raiders are taking stupid shit. They're not, like, they take some practical stuff, but like, there's people.
But mostly it's a game.
Yeah, and it's people. They're going after stuff the way they would go after it if nothing had changed in the world. So they're like grabbing jewelry and cash and perfume and all this other just stuff, just random shit. At least there's one of them who has the sense when one guy's trying to steal a TV and he's like, "What are you going to watch on that thing?"
Yeah.
but yeah.
Like, they are kind of just there to have fun.
Right.
Like, there's a pie fight.
That's true.
They
don't seem like bad dudes, honestly. Just having some beers, breaking into malls.
They seem like bad dudes, but, like, if they had just let them have their fun, they would have just taken their shit and left.
Right.
That things get really dark when Steven starts shooting.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, the machetes come out and things start to go bad. But it's not until that point. Like, before that, it's kind of slapsticky.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Until Steven fucks it up.
Yeah. Yep. Steven ruins everything. I've always... Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say there's an interesting... Like, once we get to that point in the movie, there's, like, an interesting costuming moment where... For that final confrontation with the Marauders, Steven stays in his, like, new, fancy lad outfit that he's gotten from the mall. But Peter and eventually Fran, they put back on the clothes they were wearing at the beginning.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't think
which I
clocked
think is really
Fran, but I do remember very clearly noticing Peter putting on his blue coverall SWAT suit.
Yeah, getting the SWAT fatigues back on, and Fran ends up back in pants.
Yeah.
And the same jacket she's in the beginning. So it's this kind of interesting, like, visual signal that they've kind of reconnected back to the people they were before they got seduced by the mall.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. That was, like, a very, like, clever way of cueing you that these two characters are the ones who are actually ready to leave, even though Peter doesn't think he is at first.
Yeah, and I there's another similar shot that I think is really visually smart. That's sort of the counterpoint to that one, where it's when Peter is talking about when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. They're standing on the balcony of the mall, and they're all wearing fur coats. And it's like they're all wearing these expensive fur coats looking out over this empty mall as though they've just hit the jackpot. And there's a real sort of I think it's an accent on what really matters in this situation. And at this point they still haven't gotten past the material element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
What do you think of Roger's fate and what ends up happening with him?
I mean, I think it's kind of inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Like he seems like after the apartment raid that he's kind of in a downward spiral. Like there's some PTSD happening there, and he's not going to be able to rein it in and go back to a normal life. So it's like sad, but kind of inevitable. And it's definitely like, that's about the halfway point of the movie, I think, when he gets bitten.
Yep.
And it feels like the beginning of the end from then on.
Yeah. As a little, zombie lore element, because as one gets into these things, you start really, that stuff seems to matter for some reason. I'm not immune to it, definitely. But I noticed that unlike most movies that come after it, there's no direct correlation between getting bitten by a zombie and eventually turning into one, other than like there's some talk of them looking at it as a viral thing, but it's not. They never go the route where in most modern zombie movies, when you get bitten, that's it. So they either kill you right away, or it becomes a plot point where the person hides it until they can't hide it anymore. And all they say in this movie is the people they kill get up and kill. So when Roger gets bitten, they don't react as though they need to get rid of him before he ruins everything. They keep him around and they just treat his wounds and stuff. Like it's like he got bit by a dog or something.
Yeah, I think it's a little more serious than that. I think Peter says something like, I've never seen someone survive more than a few days.
Yeah.
After they've been bit by one of those things, but it's not... There's not this sort of like, oh, he's going to, rather than die and then reanimate, he's going to gradually transform into an actual zombie. Like that's not what happens. It's like, until the moment he dies, he's still just Roger.
Yeah, there's no urgency to getting rid of him the way that there is in other movies. And I find that
right, it's not like 28 Days Later where what's-her-face just absolutely machetes her friend into pieces right away. Yeah,
I find that to be an interesting choice because I think it sort of is a counterpoint to what Peter says about they still think that there's like dignity left in dying or something like that, because they still treat Roger with dignity up until the point that he dies, and even after that they bury him. They don't throw him in the freezer, you know.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting
as much as you could bury someone under a bunch of like fake grass next to a car.
Right. Maybe like a foot and a half of mulch. Yeah. But I think it's interesting because then it makes it less of like, I don't know. There's so many other zombie movies where someone's bitten and then they turn, you know, and they become violent and they attack you. And that never happens with Roger. And I think that makes it an interesting like moral conundrum because he's dying and you know the dead are coming back. But while he's dying, he's still just your friend.
Right.
So, like, killing him preemptively or shooting him in the head feels like, well, no, but why? Like, he's sick, he's dying, he's not going to make it, but he's not a danger to us. Like, killing him now seems so egregious. Like, I don't want to kill my friend. Right. And then when he does come back, Peter has to shoot him. But it's this sort of, like there's an actual death in the middle. There's like this demarcation of my friend is gone now. Now his body is sitting up.
Yeah, and I think it comes at a good point in the story too, where you've spent like an hour or so with them very cavalierly just blasting people in the face, you know, and they've got people on the eye patch guy, I think, is on. Maybe one of the guys on TV.
Yeah, he is. He
is saying, you know, these are not humans. That's not your wife. It's not your father. It's not your brother. These are not cannibals because cannibals eat their own, and these are not. They don't eat themselves. They only eat humans. These are not humans. So you shouldn't treat them like humans. And then you get that scene where it's like watching someone die at a hospital almost, you know? It's just, and you get this great moment that I feel like I don't know if I've ever really seen it before or since, where as he's on his way out, he says to Peter, don't do it until you're sure that I've come back, because I'm going to try as hard as I can not to.
Yeah.
And it's a really, it's a kind of a touching moment of,
it is,
someone not totally taking in the inevitability of what's about to happen.
Yeah. There's also an interesting element in this movie where of our four main characters, two of them don't make it, but nobody dies a hero's death.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No one, like it's not like Steven falls on a grenade or something to take out a bunch of zombies so people can escape or whatever.
Yeah, Roger doesn't die moving the truck in front of the mall to protect everyone. He dies going back to the truck because he dropped his shit because he was reckless and not paying attention.
Yeah.
And Steven dies because he can't let go of the mall. Even when it seems like Peter is going to die, it looks like he's going to commit suicide rather than risk living on the outside again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody is offered a hero's death in this movie, which I think is a really interesting way to take it, because in so many other zombie films, somebody does the self-sacrifice play,
right?
And not here, not in this one.
Well, I think that's fairly common in the Romero zombie movies, at least the first three anyway, where there's no one who's really has a heroic sacrifice in any of it. Like in Night of the Living Dead, everybody dies because they can't work together, and nobody dies a hero's death in that situation. Most of all, Dwayne Jones getting unceremoniously shot at the very end. And in here, you're right. No one who dies in any sort of selfless, heroic way. And in Day of the Dead, I don't think... my memory of it is that anybody who dies is not exactly someone who goes out well,
Right, it's more just in the course of the action rather than trying to do something to help somebody else or save someone else.
Right. Do you like the Raiders? Do you like the whole sequence with the Raiders?
I do, despite myself. You know what I mean? Like, they're clearly supposed to be this like chaotic force that's come in to ruin everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're also like, they're so much fun.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. Like
Tom Savini just like jumping around and pulling out his mustache comb and riding motorcycles through it's like that. You guys seem kind of fun.
Every group of people in this movie, at a certain point, you go, yeah, I'd want to be part of that group. Like when they show the shit kickers, like just going out and shooting, like, yeah, that's probably pretty fun. Just have a couple beers.
Yeah, they're all like going
buddies.
up to the tables with like getting coffee and donuts.
Yeah.
And like being like, oh, look, there's another one.
I've always loved the two guys who are shooting at them and he's like, missed it. And then the other guy shoots and he's like, got him. Like very casually. Mm-hmm. And then when they get to the mall, you're like, yeah, I'd want to be part of that group. That'd be pretty awesome. And then the Raiders show up and they're like, those guys look pretty fun. Riding around in a sidecar with a Tommy gun. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Even when they're like threatening them over the radio, they're all kind of giggling over it.
Yeah, I really like that scene.
They're like, there's three of us, and they all crack up in the background. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the Raiders, and I think they're sort of the way they function, like narratively and symbolically, works really well. Where they are this just pure chaotic kind of group of locusts coming down to just consume everything in their path and move on.
Yeah. Real biker gang, by the way.
Them. Oh, really?
Yeah, a group called the Pagans, who were, I guess,
nice.
Local to Pittsburgh or whatever, came out. Everybody who lives in Pittsburgh just wants to be a part of a Romero zombie movie, and so they all just show up, and they are very...
Don't we all?
Easy to work with. Oh, yeah, we do. Speaking of the zombies, how do you feel about the zombies in this one?
They're so interesting because they're so comical.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to kind of dismiss them and see them as not a threat.
Mm.
But then in the moments when they are a threat, they're genuinely terrifying.
Yeah. Yep.
Like in the apartment building where there's a woman who runs out because she sees her husband and he's a zombie now. Mm-hmm. And he just takes complete chunks out of her.
So good.
And it is gross.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I enjoy the way the zombies kind of turn on a dime from almost like silly to scary.
Yeah, and I think it feels very intentional to treat them that way, because everybody at some point thinks that they are not a threat. Like, Roger's like, yeah, there's only a few of them. Should be able to get around them pretty easily. But it's when you don't take them seriously is when they end up getting you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also like the function that they're going back to places that are familiar. Mm-hmm. Like, they're not coming to the mall because they, like, sense living humans there or some weird esoteric shit.
Yeah.
It's literally just, like, there's some kind of chemical or electric impulse in their brain that's like, hey, I know that place.
Yeah.
And so they're just going back to it on instinct, like salmon swimming back upriver to where they respawned. It's just this instinctual thing, not this like, oh, they're malicious and they're after you.
Right. There's something so depressing about thinking like, when I die and I come back to life, my only thought is I need to go where I bought my toaster.
But it feeds perfectly into that commentary about like our overconsumption.
Sure.
And our like materialistic culture.
Definitely.
That's where you want to go when you've come back from the dead.
It's also a nice setup. I never put it together before either. It's a nice setup for when Steven turns into a zombie to lead them all back to the hideout.
Yeah.
It's a good explanation without having to be like, well, why is this guy thinking? It's like, well, no, he's just going back to what he remembers.
Right, exactly. Like that's where he was happy. That's where he thinks he belongs. So yeah, I'm gonna go back to my house.
Right.
It's like, oh, yeah, I like that. I think that's a clever way of explaining maybe why all these zombies are congregating in a suburban mall.
Yeah. I will say, I love Tom Savini. I think he's a genius. However, and he would, I've seen him say, more or less agreeing what I'm about to say. The gray zombie face paint, not a good choice.
Yeah.
It's really, I don't know. His explanation was the first movie was in black and white. This one's in color, so why not make them kind of gray to have that reminiscent of that black and white look? And he said it was a nightmare because sometimes it photographed like bluish, sometimes it was greenish, and it's just so thick. Like it's so...
Yeah.
And obviously they're having to put makeup on hundreds of people. When they were shooting this at the mall, it was a real mall, and they would basically shoot from closing time at night to when it opened the next morning. And so, they got to get in whatever they can get in like 12 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it's Tom Savini and maybe like a couple other people just slapping the best makeup they can on 100 people for the night, minus the ones who need and that's not even counting the ones who need the special like close-up stuff. And so I sympathize with what they had to do, but it's just one of those decisions where it's like, ugh, if there's one thing you could go back and change, it's probably that.
Right, like it would probably be even less jarring if they had just made them all kind of white, like made them all look really pale. Mm-hmm. Like that probably would have been at least easier to get consistent, because it does look so different sometimes from scene to scene. Some people do look blue, and then other times they do look just kind of like grayish. Yeah.
It's the same reason they made the Hulk green in the comics. When the Incredible Hulk debuted, he was gray, but they could never get the gray color consistent enough in the printing, the 4-color printing they were doing at the time. And so they changed him to a color that was easier to replicate.
Hey, smart.
Yeah.
Thinking long term.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the zombies. I think that like this was the first movie I had seen. I think I saw this and Evil Dead for the first time like pretty close together. Like I think I saw this and this was the first hit of that, and then it was like, well, what else is there? And it's like, oh shit, there's Evil Dead. Yeah, let's do it. Let's get into that. And I think it was the first time that I had realized how thin the line is between horror and comedy, where you've got these scenes where horrible things are happening, like people are literally getting ripped to pieces, but it's very funny at the same time.
Yeah.
Like the guy who is doing the blood pressure machine, and for some reason really dedicated to getting that accurate blood pressure measurement.
Really wants to know. Yeah.
Yeah, and to the point where he gets his arm torn off of his body, and it's a horrible, gory moment, but it's undeniably funny.
Yeah, they're literally tearing into him and ripping out his organs, but it is hilarious that it's happening because he was so into a blood pressure machine.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that's so great about this movie and makes it so for something that's can be so intense. I think the reason that it's so accessible is because it really is whatever you want it to be. So if you want to watch it as a horror movie, it works great as a horror movie. If you want to watch it as a comedy, I think it works great as a comedy. If you want to watch it as an action movie, it works great as an action movie. If you want to watch it as like a statement movie or a social commentary, I think it works great in that way too. And it's just, I think you could watch this movie with 5 different people who could come away with 5 different views on it and all say, yeah, that was pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it encompasses so many different facets in a very smooth way too. Like, it doesn't feel like the comedy's there, but if you're not into horror comedy, you can kind of ignore it and just watch a good zombie movie.
Yeah.
If you want the social commentary, it exists, and they definitely put it out there for you, but they're not like beating you over the head with it constantly.
Yeah. Same with
you can also just enjoy the action.
Same with the comedy too. I feel like to say, oh, well, it's a comedy. They would nowadays they lean into that too much. They don't let the
I agree.
humor of the situation create the comedy. It's like everybody's kind of got their tongue in their cheek to some extent.
Yeah, there's like one too many music cues, and like everybody's winking a little too hard at the camera.
Yeah. I'm curious to see in the remake, which we're doing on Patreon this month, where the line is on that. Because I actually have not watched the remake in a long time. I really enjoy it, but it's been a while, so I'm curious to revisit that.
I have never seen the remake.
Oh,
but
really?
I do know it's Zack Snyder, so I'm ready for it to have no sense of humor whatsoever.
It's directed by Zack Snyder, but it was written by James Gunn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, then. My hopes are restored.
But yeah, I think it's a really it's really unique because they threw everything at the wall and it all somehow managed to work for the most part.
All right, yeah.
So the end of the film, everything's fallen apart, and apparently the original ending of this movie was Peter shooting himself in the head.
Oof.
And when Fran climbs up to the helicopter, she decides she also does not want to live and climbs into the helicopter blades and kills herself.
Oh, holy shit.
And Romero's wife at the time, who you can actually see in the movie, in the opening scene at the TV station, there's a shot of George and his wife at the control panel for the station as Fran is walking through in the background. George is the big guy with the beard and the scarf. He always had a scarf for some reason. And when his wife read the script, she was like, "This is great, but this ending is so bleak."
Yeah.
And he kind of thought about it, and he was like, "Yeah, the last one was pretty bleak, so why don't we, after all these people have been through, why don't we give them at least the idea of hope at the end?" So.
Yeah, and that I like the way this movie ends a lot, where you sort of get these two characters who are kind of by their very circumstance, like even in the normal world, gonna get marginalized a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like a single pregnant woman a single pregnant working woman in the 70s is gonna get treated a certain way. A black man in the 70s in America is going to get treated in a certain way. So it's kind of nice to see that nice is the wrong word. I think it makes sense that these are the two characters who would have some inborn resilience already and kind of have a certain tolerance for adversity and hopelessness, and like knowing that this is gonna suck and be really hard, but you should try and make it work anyway. Like, it makes sense to me that those two characters would be the ones who are like, you know what, fuck it. Like, we don't have a lot of fuel, but let's see how far we get.
Yeah.
We're probably not going to make it that far. We're probably not going to live much longer than this, but let's just try. Let's see how far we can get.
Yeah. It's also interesting, too, another thing that you don't get much in this style of movie is there's never really any conflict, like real conflict between the four of them or among the four of them. You know, like there's no point where Flyboy's like, we can get out of here, Fran. If we just fuck these two over, we can take it all and get, you know, like there's never anything like that. Like what, and I wonder if it's because he's like, well, I already did that stuff in the last one. So there's no, but it's just fascinating to see these four people in this situation who are, for the most part, getting along pretty well.
I think the conflict is more emotional and intellectual.
Sure.
Because there's definitely, like, Peter and Steven do not get along at first.
Right.
And there's a ton of tension between Steven and Fran, whether it's because she's pregnant or because of the way he's treating her. Like, that relationship is not working. The time where we see them starting to come back together is right before the Marauders come, when Steven finally gives in and teaches Fran how to fly.
Right, yeah.
And I think that moment is so important because it shows that, like, she really wanted this and this was important to her, and he's finally listened to that and has given her that. And I think that exchange of, like, this is important to me and I need it, and him saying, okay, then I will give it to you, and then her learning how to do it and having this moment of success of, like, having something new in her life. This is a new skill. This is an exciting moment. Like, it brings them back together in a way. Like, we see them happy and excited together for, like, the first time the whole movie.
Right, yeah.
When she lifts the plane off, the helicopter off, and manages to land it again. And I think that's a really important moment because it puts into contrast how cold they've been with each other up until that point. And it shows that there's, like, a chance that they could be happy together in a different life than the one they have. But you know, I think the conflicts between people, I think it's really it's a smart move in this movie where you have so much, like, ultra violence happening in every other realm, to not make your main characters, like, coming to fisticuffs with each other.
Right, yeah.
To have the conflicts be more cerebral and more just about, like, how do you live with people? How do you get along with people? And how do you work together as a unit?
Yeah. Like I was saying last night, I can't believe that they're all still living in that they have this whole mall, but they're all still living in this, like, small space. If it were me,
I laughed when
I would
laughed when you said about Peter. You were like, I would want to see these people once a week.
Yeah,
max.
I would pick my shit up and go live, like, on the second floor of Sears or whatever it is. I would want to see them
especially
once a week at most.
Yeah, especially once Roger is gone.
Yeah.
Because then it's this kind of romantic couple, and then Peter. Like, I guess it's just safety in numbers and knowing that it's better to be close to one another in case something goes wrong. But yeah, it's definitely got to be awkward as hell.
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole genre of videos you can watch on the internet that I think have that exact same setup. But that's
I was thinking more of, like, if you've ever lived with just one other roommate, and then that roommate's partner is over all the time.
Yeah,
that's probably what Peter was feeling like, where it's just like, oh, really, man? Your girlfriend's here again? Doesn't she have her own place? Why is she always in our house?
Yeah, yeah. What do you think the safest store to sleep in would be? In a mall.
I was in a mall or in that
I guess
mall?
that mall. I guess we have to go by the...
Because the safest store to sleep in that mall is probably the gun store.
True.
because not only, here's my thinking, not only are you surrounded by all the weapons and ammo that you might need, that store by its very nature is going to have like a better security grate.
That's true. That's a good point.
But, you probably also want to be in one of the ones where, like, if you get trapped there, you have food and water.
Yeah. I guess how long can you fight the urge to go sleep in the store that has all the beds in it?
Right.
Like if they've got it set up,
a different mattress every night. Yeah.
Yeah, like if they've got it set up so the door system is the way that it is, where all the doors are shut, everything's locked. They've been pretty consistently safe with having nobody get in. Like, how long do you wait before you take the chance and go like, I don't want to sleep on the floor anymore. I'm going to go downstairs to Jordan's Furniture and sleep on the biggest bed I could possibly find.
But I think that's, not to take your hypothetical fun question a little too seriously, but I think that's kind of the Roger problem.
Yeah.
Of like, you start to get too cavalier, you start to have too much fun with it, and you let your guard down, and that's when shit always goes wrong in these movies.
Worth it.
to sleep on the California King.
Absolutely worth it. So, last thing I think we should probably talk about is the music. Interesting story about the music. What did you think of the music in this? As it stood?
Weird.
Yeah. Well,
so weird. There's so much like silly, almost like circusy music and like really goofy slapstick music, and then the music, when they turn on the music in the mall, I was just like, what mall would ever have this as their soundtrack? Like, this would drive people insane. This would force shoppers out of your mall. It was weird.
Did you recognize, I don't know if you are a Robot Chicken fan, did you recognize the music that plays over the credits of this as the music that plays over the credits of Robot Chicken?
I did not, because I am not.
Ah, okay. Well, it is.
Sorry to disappoint.
So what's interesting is in the opening credits, it says music by Goblin with Dario Argento.
Yeah. Yeah, I was so excited, and then I was so let down.
Well, I'll tell you why. So part of what they did in their split, Romero and Argento had Goblin come in and do a full soundtrack for the movie. And Romero was free to use that or not use it if he wanted to. And so the international version, the European version, is all Goblin. And I think it's interesting because the stuff in the theatrical American cut is a mix of Goblin and library tracks that he pulled, which is more or less the same kind of thing he did on Night of the Living Dead. It's all basically royalty-free stuff.
Yeah.
And I was surprised at how difficult it was to tell sometimes what was the library track and what was Goblin. Because the music that Goblin writes for this, I feel like is very different than their other stuff. It's not as different if you listen to it all in one place and you go like, oh yeah, that sounds like Goblin. But if it's mixed in with these other library tracks, it feels a little bit, a little more difficult to parse out what's what. I actually, this time again, listening to it with headphones, I picked up one of the library tracks that they're using in this. I was like, man, this sounds so familiar. What the hell do I know this from? And it finally dawned on me, no pun intended. It's the music from the opening credits of Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh my God.
When they're going through the whole thing about the llamas and the person who wrote the last title card got sacked and all that kind of silly stuff.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't know
I
why. I
haven't watched that in so long. I would never have pegged that.
I don't know how I managed to pull that out of the back of my brain, because I don't think I've seen that movie probably in 15 years.
Master of useless movie trivia.
Yeah, I'm really good with sounds. Like if you, when it comes to like identifying a voice, someone who's doing like a voice in a cartoon or something, I am pretty uncanny at it, strangely enough. But, so that stuff, I guess, just sticks in my brain. But yeah, so the Argento cut of Dawn of the Dead is a bit shorter, 10 minutes or so shorter. And it's mostly, in addition to the goblin music, it is, he took out a lot of the humor. So it's a lot less slapsticky, and George clearly likes the sillier stuff in concert with the other stuff. But Argento took a lot of that stuff out. He also weirdly cut out the helicopter zombie scene for some reason.
That is so strange to me, because that doesn't seem like... I don't know. That's just a weird, specific thing to cut.
Yeah, that whole sequence where they stop for gas is cut way down. Like, it basically goes from like Steven saying, "I'm gonna go check out what's in the hangar," and like cuts directly to him clotheslining that zombie. So like all of that walking around stuff is gone. He also cuts out the whole sequence with the cops at the dock. That's gone, which I don't mind. I don't mind that. That's pretty excisable scene.
Yeah.
But at the same time I was watching it, I actually watched it a couple nights ago, and it felt like the opening scene was like way longer. And it actually is like a minute and a half longer in the Argento cut of them just yelling at each other in the television station for some reason.
Oh,
so I mean,
that does seem more like his thing than the other parts you just talked about.
Yeah,
so I can see that.
To each their own, I suppose. But
yeah. I'm glad they didn't cut the cop station, the police station confrontation, because I think it does a lot of good work quickly setting up, like, even people who are usually authority figures who are supposed to like protect you are potentially now like adversaries. Like you can't rely on any of these big structures of society anymore.
Well, I always like that. I always like that scene too, because I don't know if there's any guarantee those are actually cops.
Right. True.
You know, who knows? Because they're not acting like cops. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, after the movie was finished, they showed it to a lot of distributors, and they all liked it, and they said, but that's a bit much. Probably going to need to cut this down and cool it out a little. To which they said no. And so it basically got rejected by every major studio. And eventually it was picked up by a distributor whose name I don't remember. And was allowed to be put out as unrated, which the biggest thing about having a movie that's unrated at the time, I don't think they really do it anymore. I kind of wish they would. I always thought it was cool. But the biggest problem with doing that at the time was you were not allowed to advertise it in certain places, in many places. So you couldn't advertise it during prime time on TV. And I even saw in one of the documentaries I watched, they showed a newspaper advertisement that all it said was, it's like a bunch of different little ads for movies. And then there was just one that says, for title and information, please call the theater. So like you couldn't even put it in the newspaper if it was unrated.
Yeah.
But despite that, it was a huge hit. And, you know, for all the reasons I think we've talked about. And Romero said afterwards, or he said, you know, many years later, that they immediately wanted to do a sequel, but he didn't want to go right into it. He had a couple other things he wanted to do. He ended up doing Creepshow and Night Riders, which, man, have you ever seen or heard of Night Riders?
I think I've heard of it. I know I haven't seen it.
Night Riders is one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen. It's like, you know, the one podcast that I listen to, Blank Check, which is about directors who have a lot of success early in their careers, so they're given a blank check to basically do whatever they want, whatever passion project they want. George Romero's blank check coming off of Dawn of the Dead was Night Riders, and boy, does that check bounce. And it's a movie starring Ed Harris and Tom Savini, and it is essentially the King Arthur story, but told through characters who are Renaissance fair motorcycle jousters.
Yeah, I just Googled this while you were talking about it because I was like, Knight Riders, how have I never heard of this?
Yeah.
Partially because it's Knight with a K,
Yes.
and it's all one word.
Yes.
And yep, it is King Arthur on a motorcycle.
Yep. And it's not like
Wow.
It's not like some future apocalyptic thing where we're doing the King Arthur story with motorcycle. No, they work at a Renaissance fair, so it's not like an actual sci-fi setup or anything or fantasy setup. It's people.
Yeah, no, this is
really
is just
weird.
like LARPers.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. It's LARPers. It's one of those. I watched it once and I was like, this is really interesting, but it's also 2.5 hours long for some reason.
Yikes.
So anyway, maybe we'll get to that someday. It's not really a horror movie, but might be worth.
That's so interesting that was like his like passion project.
Yeah.
That he used the sort of goodwill and success that he had accumulated thus far to like, I'm going to parlay it into Knight Riders. This is going to be fucking sweet.
You know, honestly, his career is full of those. To an extent where it makes me wonder if he actually ever had good ideas.
Yeah.
That's really mean to say, but like he does Night of the Living Dead, which obviously is a hit to some extent. And he follows that up with 2 movies that barely come out. One's called, I think it's called There's Always Vanilla, which I've never seen.
Oh.
And another one called Season of the Witch, which I have seen and I wasn't really that into. And then he does Martin, which I think is fantastic, but that doesn't really make a splash. And then he goes back to Dawn of the Dead, which is a huge hit. And then from Dawn of the Dead, he does Knight Riders, which is whatever Knight Riders ends up being.
Yeah.
And then he does Creepshow, which obviously Creepshow's great. And I can't remember if he does another one before he does Day of the Dead, but when he gets to Day of the Dead flops. And then he goes and he does something with Dario Argento. I don't know if that was really successful. And he does The Dark Half. Was it The Dark Half? Well, he does one of those Stephen King movies we covered a couple years ago. And then he does a movie called Bruiser, which I've never seen, but which is even weirder than Knight Riders and features a cameo from the Misfits for some reason. So he's had a very strange career. But for better or worse, he got to do whatever he wanted and wasn't really at the mercy of the studio system.
Yeah. I mean, more power to him, right? Like he definitely took creative swings and tried new shit. So got to admire it even when it doesn't quite work. Yeah. Wear your fur coat on the balcony of that mall while you say that. Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, and I wish I had more of a voice with which to do so. I do think it's really interesting kind of going back, looping all the way back to the start of this conversation when you were saying that the zombie genre was sort of dead, pun intended, when you had this moment of discovery watching this movie. And I think in a lot of ways, for me, that was more 28 Days Later. Because that came out when I was 14. So that's like the perfect age to see a zombie movie. And I'm pretty sure that might have been the first like zombie movie I ever really sat down and watched. And it's really fascinating seeing how much of how much DNA 28 Days Later actually got from this movie.
Oh, yes. 28 Days
but,
Later
like,
is
filtered it through a totally different point of view.
Yeah, when I saw 28 Days Later, about halfway through, when they literally just do the scene from Dawn of the Dead where they get the gas, I was like, I understand this. And then the army shows up, and I was like, oh, this is the 3 Romero movies smushed into one movie.
Even the like supermarket scene where they're all kind of going through the supermarket and the shopping carts and being sort of decadent with their consumption, it very much smacks of this movie. So that was a fun experience for me to rewatch this and be like, oh, there's a lot more of this in every other zombie movie I've ever seen.
Yeah. And it's interesting the time in which I discovered this as well, because this comes out. I see this for the first time. And then I want to say the next, very shortly after that, 28 Days Later comes out. And so I'm high on zombies already when that comes out. And then as I predicted accurately, when we came out of that movie, the first thing I said was, every zombie movie after this is going to have running zombies now. And sure enough, Zack Snyder saw that and was like, what if we make the zombies run? And so the Dawn of the Dead remake has the fast zombies, and like that came out shortly after 28 Days Later. So like I caught this like just before the upswing happened. So it was an interesting to catch that wave just early enough to kind of like really be into the whole thing.
And right before the genre sort of pivots in a very dramatic way, and then stays on that course kind of for the future. Yeah.
Dawn of the Dead, very influential movie, even to this day.
Talk about it for days.
Yep. This is number 59, I believe I said. Is that what I said? It is, I think so. 59 on our list. How do you feel about that placement?
I'm going to say I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah.
I think if it cracked 50, I wouldn't be mad.
Yeah. I think I'm putting it higher up. I think I'm putting it in somewhere in like the top 25.
I figured for you this would be a dramatic shift on the list. I think it's a really great movie. I still think it's too long, just like this episode.
And that, my friends, is where the podcast gods agreed and our recording failed us. We only missed out on about 2 minutes, though, so I don't think you're missing anything too impressive. But just to wrap it up, I want to say thank you guys for listening. If you want to help support the show, head over to patreon.com/thepenskyfile, where you can follow us as we go through reboots and remakes this year. And this month is going to be obviously the remake of Dawn of the Dead. And we have a lot more in store. And if you're in the Waltham area, come out and see us in our live show on April 17th at the Waltham Public Library. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time on Nosferatu.